The planet Zyra was a world of light and calm. Its cities floated above oceans that shimmered like liquid crystals, reflecting colors that shifted with the time of day. The air was clean and crisp, carrying the soft hum of energy that powered everything. The Xerians, a peaceful and highly intelligent species, lived in harmony with their environment. They had built their civilization on logic, planning, and a deep respect for the natural balance of their planet. Above all, they obeyed the council, a group of elders who guided the people's decisions. The council had rules, many of which seemed unbreakable. The most important rule, whispered with fear in every corner of the cities, was that no Xerian could ask outsiders for help. They must solve every problem alone, no matter how difficult it became. But now Zyra was in trouble. The energy cores that powered the floating cities and illuminated the glowing fields were beginning to fail. At first it was only a flicker, a slight dimming of the lights at night, a small hesitation in the flow of the city's energy. People noticed, but many thought it was temporary, perhaps just a small fault that would fix itself. Then the cores began to fail more often. The glowing crops that the Xerians depended on for nutrition and light began to dim. Water purification systems slowed, and even the weave, the network that connected every mind on Zyra, started to lag. For a species that relied so heavily on technology and cooperation, this was terrifying. The council convened immediately. They floated in the high chambers of the great tower, their robes glimmering with energy from the cores. They spoke in calm, measured tones, but the concern in their eyes betrayed the seriousness of the situation. "We will not call for help," Elder Vera stated firmly. "Zyra has survived for centuries without the interference of outsiders. We will find a solution ourselves." Her words were meant to comfort, but they only deepened the anxiety in the hearts of those who listened. Among the Xerians was Lyra, a young engineer known for her curiosity and unyielding determination. She worked in one of the lower energy facilities, tending to the cores and monitoring their delicate balance. Lyra had always been fascinated by the old stories, the legends of humans from distant stars. They were described as unpredictable, imaginative, and capable of seeing solutions where others saw only problems. Many dismissed these tales as myth, but Lyra found herself drawn to the idea of a species so different from her own. Now, as the cores flickered and her fellow engineers scrambled to stabilize them, Lyra began to think differently. Perhaps the humans could help. Perhaps they could save Zyra in ways that her people could not. The thought was dangerous. To even speak of seeking help from outsiders was forbidden. Yet, Lyra could not ignore the failing lights, the weakening energy, or the fear in the eyes of the people. Late one evening, after another failure in the central core, Lyra lingered in the control chamber. The hum of the city was uneven, like a heart beating too slowly. She stared at the glowing panels, her mind racing with ideas. She began sketching a plan on a transparent tablet, a plan that was daring and forbidden. She would send a message to the humans. She would ask for their help. The first step was building a transmitter powerful enough to reach across the stars. Lyra knew it would be difficult. Zyra's technology was advanced, but their systems were designed to communicate within their own planet, not to bridge the vast distances of space. She worked in secret, often late into the night, scavenging components from unused satellites and old energy conduits. Her friends, a small group of engineers and scientists who shared her doubts about the council's strict rules, joined her. They whispered to each other, careful that no one else overheard, and worked tirelessly to assemble the device. As the transmitter neared completion, the weight of their actions pressed on Lyra. If they were discovered, they could be exiled from their cities, forced to live in the wild regions of Zyra or worse. But still, hope shone brighter than fear. The people needed help, and if the humans could provide it, it might save everyone. Finally, the transmitter was ready. It was a sleek structure, a combination of old and new technology, glowing softly with energy harvested from the cores themselves. Lyra activated it, her hands trembling slightly. She began composing the message, carefully choosing words that would explain their situation without revealing the vulnerabilities of Zyra's society. She described the failing cores, the dimming crops, and the urgent need for clever solutions. When the message was complete, she hesitated for only a moment before sending it. Across the stars, light traveled in straight lines, carrying the signal farther than any Xerian had ever reached. Lyra watched the glowing panel, waiting, wondering if it would ever be received. Days passed. The cores continued to falter, but then, one morning, the response arrived. Humans. They had received the message. It was almost unbelievable. The humans were coming. Lyra and her friends watched the night sky with a mixture of excitement and anxiety, tracking the faint path of the approaching ship. The humans traveled with curiosity, their intentions unknown. The Xerians had never hosted visitors from another planet. They did not know what to expect. The city streets buzzed with whispers of anticipation. People gathered near the observation towers, eyes wide, mouths slightly open. Some were fearful, recalling the council's warnings. Others, however, could not help but wonder what the humans might bring. New ideas, new ways to solve problems, perhaps even a friendship that could change their society forever. Lyra, standing at the edge of one of the floating platforms, felt a strange mix of pride and nervousness. They had broken the rules, defied the council, and reached across the stars. Yet she knew it was the right decision. The planet needed help, and she believed in the humans' ingenuity. The first human ship arrived quietly, gliding through Zyra's atmosphere without disturbance. It was small but elegant, a contrast to the heavy, carefully engineered structures of Xerian cities. Its windows reflected the light of the planet, and its hull seemed to shimmer with life. Lyra's heart pounded as she watched it descend, not with the roar of engines but with the soft grace of something alive. When the ship landed, the hatch opened, and humans stepped out. They looked ordinary at first, 2 legs, 2 arms, and faces that seemed familiar yet entirely foreign. But the curiosity in their eyes was unmistakable. They observed, they listened, and they moved with confidence, yet without arrogance. Lyra felt an immediate connection, a sense that these beings could understand the challenge before them. The council convened once more, this time not in the great tower, but in smaller chambers that overlooked the landing site. The elders whispered to one another, faces tight with concern. Yet they could not ignore the fact that the humans had arrived, that they were here to help, and that they had no intention of causing harm. Lyra approached the humans cautiously, introducing herself and explaining the situation in simple, clear words. The humans asked questions, not to criticize, but to understand. They wanted to know how the cores worked, why they were failing, and what the Xerians had tried so far. Their questions were direct, sometimes blunt, but always thoughtful. Lyra felt a sense of hope she had not experienced in weeks. As the sun set over Zyra's oceans, the humans began to study the energy cores. They did not rush. They did not demand immediate results. Instead, they observed patterns, suggested experiments, and encouraged Lyra and her friends to think differently. It was unlike anything the Xerians had experienced. Their minds were used to logic, rules, and careful planning, but the humans seemed to thrive on creativity, flexibility, and unexpected solutions. For the first time in many cycles, the dimming lights of Zyra seemed to hold promise. The floating cities glowed with a faint shimmer of hope, and the people began to gather near the observation platforms, watching the collaboration unfold. Whispers of optimism spread like wildfire. Perhaps this was the beginning of a new era. Perhaps the Council's strict rules, while once protective, were no longer the only path forward. Lyra stayed late into the night, working alongside the humans. They laughed at some mistakes, celebrated small discoveries, and slowly, bit by bit, they began to understand the failing systems. Lyra realized that asking for help was not weakness, it was courage. And courage, she thought, was the true power of any civilization, Xerian or human. By the time the first light of the new cycle touched the oceans, the energy cores were stabilizing. The dimming fields began to glow softly again, and the hum of the floating cities returned to its steady rhythm. Lyra stood at the edge of the platform, feeling the warmth of hope for the first time in what felt like an eternity. The humans had arrived, not as conquerors but as collaborators, and the people of Zyra had seen that reaching beyond their own rules could bring life back to their world. It was only the beginning. Many challenges remained, and the Council's rules still hung over them like shadows. Yet, for the first time, Zyra had a glimpse of a future where help was not forbidden, and where the courage to act, even in the face of fear, could bring light to the darkest places. And in that quiet moment, as the stars stretched across the sky and the humans prepared for the work ahead, Lyra whispered to herself, "We did the right thing." The right thing is never easy, but it is always worth it. The humans had arrived, and Zyra buzzed with a new kind of energy. Their ship glimmered softly in the city's glow, a small vessel that carried minds unlike any Xerian had ever encountered. Lyra stood near the observation platform, watching them as they moved with careful curiosity, their gestures relaxed but deliberate. Every movement seemed thoughtful, every glance a search for understanding. The Xerians, trained to rely on rules and precision, could not help but feel a mixture of awe and unease. The council remained tense. Elder Vera and her peers convened immediately after the humans' landing, their robes flickering faintly as the energy cores hummed below. "We must observe," Vera instructed, her voice calm but firm. "We will not interfere. They are not of our world. Their methods may be unpredictable, but we will allow them to act for now." Other elders nodded, though unease lingered in their eyes. Lyra approached the humans with a small group of engineers. They were eager to assist but careful not to overwhelm their guests with too much information at once. The humans, in turn, listened attentively, asked questions, and took careful notes. Their curiosity was genuine, their interest more than superficial. One of the humans, a woman named Alara, knelt by a small energy conduit, pointing at a series of glowing lines. "What if we try redirecting the flow here first?" she suggested. Her tone was soft but confident. "It may stabilize the output while we examine the core itself." The idea startled the Xerians. They had been trained to follow the core manuals precisely, step by step, without deviation. To suggest redirecting energy without full protocol was almost unthinkable. Yet Lyra could not deny the sense of possibility in Alara's words. Carefully, she and her team adjusted the conduits as suggested, monitoring the flow. Slowly, the energy stabilized, just as the human had predicted. The floating platform beneath them vibrated slightly, then hummed with renewed steadiness. A cheer rose quietly among the engineers. "This is unusual," one Xerian muttered, watching the humans work. "Their methods are not by the books. They think differently." "Yes," Lyra replied, her eyes bright with excitement. "And it works. We cannot ignore it." The humans spent the next cycles moving systematically through the energy systems, studying patterns, observing faults, and suggesting subtle changes. They did not force their ways on the Xerians, nor did they demand authority. Instead, they encouraged experimentation, testing one idea at a time. Slowly, the dimming lights of the glowing fields began to recover, and the hum of the floating cities returned to a steady rhythm. Yet it was not without challenges. Zyra's systems were older than the humans could have imagined, built layer upon layer with centuries of careful modifications. Some components resisted adjustment, while others reacted unpredictably. Lyra watched as one human, a man named Joran, carefully adjusted a conduit, then stepped back with a thoughtful frown. We need to think about how the core balances with the weave, he said. If we stabilize one area too much, it may shift stress to another. It's all connected. Lyra nodded, understanding instantly. We've only been seeing parts, she admitted. Not the whole. The human smiled faintly. Exactly. Sometimes seeing the whole picture requires stepping back and trying ideas we wouldn't normally consider. As they worked, word spread through the cities. Xerians gathered in small groups near the observation platforms, whispering excitedly. Some were skeptical, fearful of the unknown humans. Others were hopeful, eager to see their world restored. Children watched with wide eyes as the humans and Xerians worked side by side, demonstrating collaboration that no Xerian had seen in generations. The floating gardens glowed brighter, the streets hummed with energy, and for the first time in many cycles, hope seemed tangible. The council continued to watch from the great tower, their faces a mixture of caution and wonder. Elder Vera found herself leaning closer to the viewing screen more than once, her curiosity stronger than her hesitation. She observed the humans carefully, noting how they approached problems, how they adapted, and how they inspired the Xerians to think creatively. It was unlike anything she had seen before, and though she was hesitant to admit it, she recognized the value of what was happening. One evening, as the twin moons rose over Zyra's oceans, the humans gathered with Lyra and her friends in a smaller chamber. They had been working on the central core for several cycles, making slow but steady progress. Ilara spoke first, her voice calm. We need to understand the patterns of fluctuation. The energy shifts in a rhythm. If we can map it, we can predict and stabilize it more effectively. Lyra nodded, tracing the lines of data on her tablet. It's like music, she said. A pattern that repeats with small variations. If we can follow it, we can harmonize the chords. Exactly, Joran added. The trick is not to control it rigidly but to guide it, like conducting an orchestra rather than forcing each instrument. The Xerians were fascinated. They had never thought of their energy systems as dynamic, like living things with rhythm and flow. The humans' perspective challenged everything they had been taught, opening new ways of thinking. Slowly, they began to adopt similar approaches, observing and experimenting, learning to anticipate rather than just react. Outside, the floating cities glimmered softly, the energy stabilizing in waves. The glowing crops seemed to stretch taller, basking in the restored power. Children ran along the platforms, pointing excitedly at lights that pulsed gently beneath their feet. Even the council could not resist observing the progress, their stern faces softening as the results became undeniable. Yet despite the improvements, Lyra knew the work was far from complete. Zyra's systems were intricate, with hidden interdependencies that could easily be disrupted. The humans were patient, carefully noting each detail and teaching the Xerians to do the same. Mistakes were small and harmless, corrected quickly, and each one became a lesson rather than a setback. Over the next cycles, a bond formed between the humans and the Xerians. They shared ideas, stories, and even small cultural practices. Lyra learned about the humans' customs, their playful humor, and their ability to find joy even amidst challenges. The humans, in turn, marveled at Zyra's floating cities, glowing fields, and the harmonious connection of minds through the weave. Mutual respect grew, bridging the vast differences in their species. One morning, Lyra awoke to a soft glow from the central core. She hurried to the observation chamber, where the humans were already analyzing the latest data. Ilara turned to her with a smile. "We've found a balance," she said. "The cores are stabilizing across the network. If we continue at this pace, Zyra will return to full power in the next few cycles." Lyra's heart leapt. She had never seen such precise, careful, and patient collaboration. The human's presence had transformed the way her people approached problems. It was not just about fixing the energy cores. It was about learning, adapting, and thinking beyond the rules that had once confined them. The news reached the cities quickly. Xerians cheered softly, a collective sigh of relief and wonder rising through the platforms. Even those who had doubted the humans' intentions now watched in awe. For the first time, they understood that strength was not always about following rules to the letter, but about combining knowledge, creativity, and courage to overcome challenges together. As the moons climbed higher in the sky, Lyra walked along the edge of a floating platform, her thoughts racing. She thought about the risks they had taken, defying the Council's orders, and wondered if they would ever forgive her. Yet the results were undeniable. The humans had arrived and Zyra was thriving once more. The cores hummed in harmony, the crops glowed softly, and the cities glimmered like jewels above the oceans. Joran joined her, carrying a small device for monitoring the core's energy flow. "They're incredible, aren't they?" he said. "Your people, your systems, and humans. It's amazing what can happen when worlds work together." Lyra smiled. "Yes, I've always believed humans were remarkable, but seeing it in action is beyond anything I imagined." "They've taught you something important," Joran added. "Not just about energy or technology, but about seeing differently, about approaching problems with an open mind." Lyra nodded, feeling the truth in his words. The humans' arrival had done more than stabilize the cores. It had opened her mind, her people's minds, and even the Council's minds to new possibilities. A spark of change had begun, subtle but powerful, and she knew it would grow. That night, Lyra watched the stars with a sense of anticipation. The humans would remain for several more cycles, guiding and teaching, but she could already feel the shift within Zyra itself. The people were learning to observe patterns, experiment with new ideas, and embrace creativity alongside discipline. The rigid fear of asking for help, once so ingrained, was slowly giving way to curiosity, collaboration, and courage. Lyra whispered quietly to herself, "We dared to hope. We dared to reach beyond the rules, and it has begun. This is only the start of something greater." In the quiet of the floating city, the humans worked patiently, the Xerians followed, and Zyra hummed with renewed life. For the first time in generations, the planet did not feel confined by its rules. The sky stretched wide, the stars above sparkled, and the possibilities of the universe seemed closer than ever before. And though the Council still observed cautiously, even they could not deny that change was happening. The humans had arrived, not as conquerors but as partners, teachers, and friends. Zyra was awakening to a new way of thinking, a new way of solving problems, and a new understanding of what it meant to thrive. The planet was no longer alone. Help had arrived, and with it, a promise of discovery, growth, and endless possibilities. The days passed quickly on Zyra, each one bringing progress and new discoveries. The humans had integrated seamlessly with the Xerians, teaching them not just about energy systems, but about observation, creativity, and problem-solving. Lyra moved constantly between the central core, the observation platforms, and the floating gardens, coordinating the work and absorbing everything she could from the humans' methods. She noticed how their eyes moved with curiosity, how their minds sought connections instead of rigid rules. One morning, a small but important challenge arose. The central energy core, the heart of the floating city, began to fluctuate unexpectedly. The soft hum that had returned to the city grew uneven, causing a ripple of concern among the engineers. Panels flickered, and the glowing crops dimmed slightly. The humans, Lyra, and the team gathered immediately. Alara knelt beside the core, tracing the flow lines with her fingers. "It's a complex pattern," she said quietly. "There's an imbalance forming, but it's not catastrophic yet. We need to understand the rhythm fully before we adjust anything." Lyra studied the readings. "The core's behavior is like a pulse, but the fluctuations are irregular. They're subtle, but if left unchecked, they could destabilize the floating platforms." Joran stepped forward, a thoughtful expression on his face. "It's connected to the weave," he said. When the minds of the Xerians are stressed or distracted, even slightly, it impacts the core's energy. The patterns are not just mechanical, they're linked to how people think and feel. The idea fascinated Lyra. She had always known the weave connected minds, but she had never considered that emotions or focus could affect physical energy systems. Then we must involve more people, she said. We need calm and observation, everyone contributing to harmony. Word spread quickly, and volunteers from the city gathered near the core. They followed Lyra's instructions, remaining calm and focused. The humans guided them gently, explaining how energy flow could respond to collective intention, encouraging observation without pressure. The room was quiet but alive with concentration. Lights shimmered softly, and the floating platforms vibrated with controlled rhythm. Hours passed, and small adjustments began to stabilize the fluctuations. Alara suggested subtle tweaks to the conduits, and Joran monitored the weave's response in real time. The Xerians learned to anticipate changes rather than just react, blending human improvisation with their disciplined knowledge. Slowly, the core's pulse returned to a smooth, steady rhythm. Lyra exhaled with relief. The humans had done more than fix a technical problem. They had taught her people to understand their systems on a deeper level. No longer were the energy cores just machines. They were living systems, influenced by the cooperation, focus, and creativity of those who maintained them. That evening, the council convened once more. Elder Vera and her peers floated in the great tower, watching the glow of the city below. The humans' methods are unusual, Vera admitted softly, her eyes following the movement of the technicians below. But the results are undeniable. Zyra has never operated with this harmony before. There is learning here that we cannot ignore. Another elder spoke quietly. They have shown that collaboration is not weakness, and that asking for help can strengthen rather than diminish. Perhaps our rules were too rigid. Vera nodded slowly, a mixture of concern and hope in her eyes. She remembered the moment Lyra first sent the message across the stars, defying the council's orders. Now, seeing the transformation, she could not deny that courage and curiosity had brought life back to their world. The following cycles brought new challenges, each one more intricate than the last. The energy networks were interconnected with the weave, the floating platforms, the glowing crops, and even environmental controls. A small adjustment in one sector could ripple across the system, creating unexpected effects elsewhere. Lyra and the humans worked patiently, testing ideas, observing outcomes, and teaching the Xerians to do the same. One day, a particularly puzzling fluctuation occurred. The energy output in the southern sector began oscillating wildly, causing the platforms to wobble gently and the crops to shimmer unevenly. Lyra and her team gathered around the readings, puzzled. Joran suggested a new approach. Let's treat this as a pattern, not a problem. We observe it, document every change, and see what triggers the fluctuations. Only then do we adjust. The Xerians hesitated. Their training emphasized immediate correction, but the humans encouraged patience and careful study. Slowly, Lyra guided her people to adopt this method. They observed, noted, and adjusted incrementally. Gradually, the oscillations settled into a manageable rhythm. The platform stabilized, and the southern crops regained their glow. Lyra marveled at the transformation. Her people had begun to see energy systems not as static machines, but as living, responsive networks. They were learning to collaborate not just with humans, but with one another, blending observation, experimentation, and intuition. Meanwhile, outside the core chambers, children and families watched with fascination. Humans shared stories of their own planets, tales of creativity and problem-solving that inspired the young Xerians. Curiosity spread like wildfire. People who had once feared change now embraced it, seeing possibility where before there had been caution. The humans also introduced small inventions to aid observation and learning. Simple devices that tracked energy flow, visualized patterns, and highlighted fluctuations allowed the Xerians to understand their world more intuitively. Lyra watched as her friends and colleagues eagerly used these tools, experimenting, adjusting, and learning with joy. As the cycles progressed, Lyra realized that Zyra's systems were becoming more resilient than ever before. Problems that once would have caused panic were now approached with calm observation, creative thinking, and collaboration. The humans had not only restored energy to the planet, they had transformed the way her people approached challenges. One evening, Lyra walked with Alara to the edge of a floating platform, watching the glowing fields below. "You've done something remarkable," Lyra said softly. "Not just fixing the cores, but teaching us to think differently." Alara smiled. "It was your courage that brought us here. You reached across the stars when others would have followed the rules blindly. You opened the door. We just walked through it with you." Lyra felt a surge of pride. It had been terrifying to defy the Council, to send a message to beings unknown, but the results were undeniable. Zyra was thriving, and her people were learning in ways she had never imagined. Even the Council began to change. Elder Vera met with Lyra privately, floating quietly in the observation chamber. "I admit, I feared what you were doing," Vera said. "Breaking the rules could have destroyed trust in our society. But instead, you have shown us that courage, curiosity, and collaboration can bring great strength. We have learned a lesson that no council decree could teach." Lyra bowed respectfully. "We only wanted to save our world. But we also discovered that help, when chosen wisely, is not weakness, it is strength." Vera nodded. "You are right. Zyra has changed because of your choice, and perhaps it is time for our rules to reflect that." The following cycles saw a transformation across Zyra. Citizens began experimenting with new energy flows, observing patterns, and collaborating across disciplines. The human influence encouraged a balance of imagination and discipline, blending the best of both worlds. The floating cities glowed brighter than ever, the crops shimmered with vitality, and the weave thrummed with a harmony previously unknown. Lyra worked tirelessly alongside the humans, learning and teaching simultaneously. Joran and Alara guided her through intricate adjustments, but Lyra's own insights were recognized and applied. She realized that Zyra's strength had always been in the minds of its people, but it had been limited by fear and rigid adherence to rules. Now, with guidance and courage, that strength was unleashed. As the final cycle of human assistance approached, Lyra looked over the city with a mixture of pride and bittersweet longing. The humans had become part of Zyra's story, and soon they would leave. Yet the lessons they brought would remain. The Xerians were no longer confined by fear of asking for help. They had learned the value of creativity, collaboration, and open-mindedness. On the last evening, the humans gathered with Lyra and her team at the central core. They reviewed the progress one final time, ensuring that all systems were balanced, stable, and sustainable. Alara spoke softly. "Your people have done incredible work. The cores are strong, the systems resilient, and the city is thriving. We leave knowing that Zyra is in capable hands." Lyra felt a mixture of gratitude and sadness. "You've taught us so much, not just about energy or technology, but about how to think differently, how to work together, and how to embrace courage." Joran smiled. "It was a partnership, Lyra. You and your people did the work, made the discoveries, and adapted the lessons. We only guided you. Zyra's true strength has always been here." As the humans prepared to depart, the council and citizens gathered to watch. The ship lifted gracefully, reflecting the glow of the floating cities and shimmering oceans. Children waved, families cheered softly, and Lyra felt a deep sense of accomplishment. She had dared to defy rules, to reach across the stars, and to trust in beings unknown. The results were beyond her imagination. The ship disappeared into the sky, leaving behind devices, tools, and a wealth of knowledge for the Xerians to continue exploring. Lyra turned to the council, her heart steady with newfound confidence. "We have learned something greater than technology," she said. "We have learned that courage, creativity, and collaboration are the true power of a civilization." The council, once strict and unyielding, now listened with quiet respect. They understood that Zyra's future was brighter because of openness, because of willingness to try new ideas, and because of trust in others. Lyra gazed over the glowing cities, the stable energy cores, and the thriving crops. Zyra was no longer merely surviving, it was flourishing. And it was no longer alone. Across the stars, connections had been made, lessons learned, and possibilities opened that would shape generations to come. For the first time, the Xerians felt the truth of their own strength. It was not just in their knowledge, not just in their discipline, but in their courage to act, to learn, and to trust that even beyond their world, hope and ingenuity existed. And in that quiet, shimmering night, as the stars stretched endlessly across the sky, Lyra whispered softly to herself, "We dared to hope, and we dared to reach." And now our world shines brighter than ever before. The human ship had disappeared into the starry sky, leaving Zyra in a state of quiet wonder. For the first time in generations, the planet felt lighter, freer, and more alive. Lyra stood on the edge of a floating platform, gazing out at the glowing fields below. The energy cores pulsed evenly, the floating cities hummed in harmony, and the crops shimmered with renewed life. The planet was thriving, yet the greatest change had already begun within the minds of its people. The council gathered in the great tower once more. Elder Vera's robe glimmered softly as she addressed the assembly. "We have observed remarkable progress," she said, her voice carrying a calm authority. "The humans have departed, yet their lessons remain. Our systems are stable, and our cities shine brighter than ever. But more importantly, our people have learned something that no technology alone could teach: courage, collaboration, and the power of seeking help when needed." Other elders nodded quietly, some with relief, others with pride. The rigid fear that had guided Zyra for centuries was finally softening. For the first time, the council openly acknowledged that wisdom sometimes lay outside their rules. Lyra moved among the people, observing the changes that had taken root. Citizens worked together with newfound creativity, experimenting with energy conduits, weave integration, and crop management. Engineers who had once feared deviation from manuals now adjusted, tested, and improved systems on their own. Children ran along the floating platforms, their laughter echoing across the shimmering cities, inspired by the stories of the humans and the courage of those who had reached across the stars. Lyra paused to speak with a small group of young engineers. "See how the patterns flow," she said, pointing to the soft pulses of energy across the weave. "The energy responds to observation and intention. Each of you can influence it, guide it, and learn from it. Zyra's strength comes from understanding and creativity, not just rules." The children's eyes widened, and their hands moved to small monitoring devices that captured energy flow. They giggled when patterns shifted in response to their adjustments, but their giggles were accompanied by fascination and pride. Lyra smiled, remembering how she had felt when first working with the humans. The spark of curiosity was spreading, like a gentle tide across the planet. Even the council's youngest members, apprentices who once memorized rules without question, now experimented with simulations of energy networks, guided by the principles taught by the humans. They were learning that mistakes were not failures, but opportunities to grow. Observation, experimentation, and creativity were becoming the pillars of Zyra's new culture. Lyra returned to the central core, where she spent cycles analyzing data and refining processes. The humans' guidance had left behind not just technical knowledge, but a philosophy, a way of thinking that encouraged connection, adaptation, and imagination. She reflected on how different Zyra felt now. There was less fear, more collaboration, and a sense of possibility that had never existed before. As days turned into cycles, Lyra noticed another change. The citizens were more willing to share ideas openly. Engineers collaborated across districts, exchanging methods and observations. Farmers adjusted energy flow to improve crop growth, learning from one another and the subtle guidance of the weave. The city platforms hummed with synchronized energy, responding to the collective effort of thousands of minds working in harmony. Lyra was approached by Elder Vera one afternoon. "Lyra, your courage has shaped more than the energy systems," she said. "You have transformed the very way our people think. Zyra is no longer bound by fear of failure or strict rules. You have shown us that growth comes from openness, experimentation, and willingness to reach beyond ourselves." Lyra bowed respectfully. "I only acted because I knew our world was at risk. The humans taught me much, but the people of Zyra embraced it. The courage has always been here. It just needed a spark." Vera nodded, her eyes reflecting the glow of the floating cities. "Then let this spark continue to guide us. Let us build a Zyra that learns, adapts, and thrives through collaboration, both within and beyond our world." Word of the changes reached every corner of the planet. Citizens shared stories of the humans' visit and the lessons they had learned. The idea of seeking help, once forbidden, became a symbol of strength rather than weakness. Young Xerians began to imagine exploring beyond their own planet, curious about the vast universe they had once been taught to avoid. Lyra watched as the floating gardens glimmered under the twin moons. Families tended the crops, engineers adjusted conduits, and children ran freely, their laughter a melody that harmonized with the gentle hum of the city. Zyra was alive in a way it had never been before, not just mechanically, but emotionally, socially, and intellectually. The council held a public assembly to announce new guidance for the planet. Citizens gathered along the observation platforms, the twin moons casting soft light over their faces. Elder Vera addressed them with calm authority. "We have learned that courage, collaboration, and creativity are our greatest strengths. Asking for help is not a sign of weakness, but a path to discovery and growth. Zyra will no longer be limited by fear of the unknown. We will embrace knowledge, connection, and the possibilities that lie beyond our world." Applause rose gently, mixed with laughter and cheers. People shared smiles, and for the first time, a sense of freedom filled the floating cities. The rigid fear of old rules had lifted, replaced by curiosity, hope, and the thrill of possibility. Lyra felt a hand on her shoulder. It was one of the human devices left behind, humming softly. She smiled, remembering the time when they had first arrived, uncertain of what to expect. The humans had given them more than technology. They had given a philosophy, a new way of thinking that would guide Zyra for generations. Over the following cycles, Zyra flourished like never before. The energy cores remained stable, guided by both human-inspired methods and the ingenuity of Xerians. The glowing crops shone brighter, feeding not only bodies but also the minds of those who tended them. Floating cities thrummed with harmony, reflecting the collective effort of thousands of minds working together. Lyra spent her cycles mentoring young engineers and apprentices. She taught them not just technical skills, but observation, curiosity, and courage. "You are Zyra's future," she said one evening, gesturing at the glowing platforms. "Your ideas, your creativity, and your willingness to collaborate will guide this planet forward. Never fear the unknown. Embrace it, and it will bring life and learning to all of Zyra." The apprentices listened intently, their eyes bright with excitement. They experimented freely, their mistakes welcomed as opportunities to understand, their successes celebrated as progress. The city hummed with their energy, a living reflection of the lessons that humans had helped plant within the hearts and minds of Xerians. Even the most skeptical citizens found themselves inspired. Farmers integrated new observation methods into crop growth. Scientists explored subtle patterns in the weave, and children imagined far-off worlds, dreaming of connections yet to be made. Zyra was no longer bound by fear of failure or rigid rules. It was alive with curiosity, courage, and possibility. Lyra walked one evening to the edge of a platform overlooking the glowing city. The air was crisp, the twin moons casting silver reflections across the oceans. She thought of the humans, of the courage it took to reach across the stars, and of the lessons they had left behind. Zyra had grown stronger not just in its systems but in its spirit. She whispered to herself, "We dared to hope, we dared to act." And Zyra has become brighter because of it. From that night onward, Zyra continued to thrive. The energy cores pulsed steadily, the floating cities glimmered, and the weave hummed in harmony. Citizens worked together, inspired by lessons of observation, creativity, and courage. The council remained vigilant but open-minded, guiding the planet with a balance of wisdom and flexibility. And though the humans had returned to the stars, their influence endured. Zyra was no longer a world confined by rules or fear. It was a world alive with curiosity, growth, and the infinite possibilities of imagination and collaboration. Lyra often looked to the night sky, imagining distant stars and planets, knowing that one day Zyra might reach beyond itself again. The courage to act, the openness to learn, and the willingness to embrace help had changed everything. Zyra had discovered its true strength, not just in knowledge, technology, or energy, but in the hearts and minds of its people. As the twin moons set over the sparkling oceans, Lyra smiled. She could see the glowing fields, hear the hum of the floating cities, and feel the pulse of life running through Zyra. The planet was no longer silent with caution or fear. It was singing with hope, curiosity, and courage, ready for every challenge and every possibility the universe might offer. And in that quiet, shining moment, Lyra knew with certainty that Zyra's brightest days were not behind it. They were just beginning.